Hello. So what I'm going to do is start talking you through Agnes Varda, because she's obviously our sort of next case study. I'm timing myself while I do this because I don't want to kind of carry on talking after the video's finished because I can't see the timer because we're on full screen. I haven't done one of these for about a week, so I might be a bit rusty. Now, I know some of you sort of mentioned it'll probably be better for me not to play the videos on the screencast, but it's just quite useful for me to do that because then I can remind myself of what I'm referring to, but also you can kind of maybe sort of scroll through the Prezi in your own time and watch the videos and sort of pause my rabbiting on and stuff. So this might have 2 or 3 parts, I can't remember, but it's quite a long Prezi. But here she is, Agnes Varda. So we have an image of her sort of shortly before she died, thumbing her nose at a young version of her. And I think this image kind of tells us quite a lot about Agnes Varda because she's a sort of she's very fun. She's got a very good sort of sense of humour. She doesn't take herself too seriously, which is not something you're used to seeing from sort of experimental filmmakers or filmmakers who don't sort of operate in the mainstream. And I think there's always that preconception about sort of people who make more experimental films, they're a bit po-faced, and Varda certainly wasn't that. So what I want to do is kind of give you some background on her, some biography and stuff like I'd like to do to give you some sort of context for her, because I think sort of context for some of the French New Wave is quite useful. Now normally we would be talking quite a lot about the French New Wave in general, about the magazine that a lot of the French New Wave wrote for, Cahiers du Cinéma, and its influence and all that kind of stuff. But we're going to have to kind of retrofit that once we're back in the same room, because I think a lot of that, sort of a lot of that's quite useful when we're actually in the same room, because then I can sort of set tasks around and stuff like that. But anyway, this is one of her quotes that I sort of found when I was researching this for the first time. I wrote it last year. "Discovering the complexity of people is half the game." And this kind of this for me encapsulates Varda as a filmmaker. She's very much influenced or interested, in humanity and being human and what it is to be human, and about how everybody is quite a complex person, and she's very kind of interested in that complexity and how life isn't that simple. Strangely, Cleo from 5 to 7 is quite a different film of hers, but it's quite typical of the French New Wave, so it's a kind of a weird one. But anyway, we'll see that when we get to screen. So she was born in Arlette. Arlette Varda in Belgium in 1928. And she sort of moved around for the whole of her childhood. At one point, she lived on a boat during World War II on the Seine near Paris. So she sort of moved around between Belgium and Paris for most of her childhood. So she didn't, unlike many of the French New Wave directors, she wasn't actually from France, but she sort of grew up in France and grew up in Paris. So she had very much an outsider's point of view on French culture, on Parisian culture, because although we might associate Belgium and France as very kind of closely linked, they are fundamentally slightly different cultures, because Belgium is very much more around sort of farming culture and arboreal, sort of pursuits and stuff like that, whereas France is a much bigger country, much more powerful and all that kind of stuff. So after the Second World War, she went to the Sorbonne, which is one of the most acclaimed universities, one of the highest profile universities worldwide, in Paris, and she studied literature and psychology. So an interesting kind of combination there, that she was interested in sort of sort of books and the literary background, but also what makes people work. And if you go back to that quote that I showed you at the beginning, discovering the complexity of people is half the game. That use of that word game is quite interesting. But anyway, psychology obviously helps you kind of think about the sort of complexity of people. She didn't like Paris. She didn't like it when she got there. She described it as you can see there, excruciating. And she found it this kind of massively alienating, in her words, grey space. So she'd come from like the countryside into this big city, which was kind of alienating and sort of rejected her, and she didn't feel at home there. She didn't get on well with the fellow students, maybe because she had a different cultural background, being from Belgium as opposed to France. And she didn't like the classes, so she felt they were stupid, antiquated, abstract, and scandalously unsuited for the lofty needs one had at that age. So she felt that, sort of academia and, sort of lectures and, sort of chin-stroking, highbrow people weren't for her. And again, that sort of illustrates where she is as an experimental filmmaker, because unlike, again, many of the other French New Wave filmmakers with whom, she worked at the same time, she wasn't as interested in being highbrow. She was interested in what makes people tick. The online magazine Senses of Cinema, which I really recommend, just Google Senses of Cinema. There's loads of stuff on there, and I often put links from there about our directors. And I think there's a link on there about Varda as well. And I did set some of you a task to do with Senses of Cinema in Buñuel. But anyway, she studied art history at the Louvre, the School of the Louvre. So the Louvre is a very, very famous French gallery where in a previous PowerPoint you've seen the stars of Bande Apart, the Godard film, run through the Louvre. And that's the school for that. And she was really interested in art. So she worked as a photographer for the Popular National Theatre, as you can see there. So she moved from looking at sort of quite distancing literature and psychology into art and self-expression, and then became a photographer. So she's very interested in kind of art and recording the world around her. And her photographer's eye really influenced what she did. Her first film, I think you can see loads of elements of photography in here and literature and stuff like that, but also a sense of place. So it's a film called La Pointe Courte. This is available in our library, but this is about a couple who meet at a seaside town, and they're sort of drifting apart, but they're drifting together, and they have all these memories and stuff like that. Keep an eye out for a cat. Cats was something that Varda loved. She loved cats, and cats appear in almost every one of her films. Let's just have a quick look.
Tu vois, c'est ici la Pointe Courte.
Tu m'en as parlé si souvent.
So you see that very still photographer's eye for composition and framing. There's the cat caught in the net. And if you think about Breathless and other films that we might have seen for French New Wave, this is very much more of a still film.
Et cette maison, j'y suis né.
And then we've got Memories, the house I was born in. All this kind of bric-a-brac.
Celle-là?
Things that people leave behind.
Et voilà le chantier. Il y a longtemps que j'avais envie de revenir.
Sans moi, pourquoi n'es-tu pas revenu plus tôt?
Sans toi ou avec toi.
Aucune différence pour toi.
Je ne dis pas cela. Mais ce que j'ai retrouvé ici est à moi tout seul.
Okay. Let's go. Okay. So that's the Pointe Courte, which is now thought of as sort of one of the earliest French New Wave films. It's very much before the majority of the French New Wave. And in fact, I might mention this a little bit later, but a famous French film producer, an investor, was looking for somebody to invest in a new French filmmaker. And Jean-Luc Godard said, give your money to Agnès Varda, and she used that to make La Pointe Courte. It kind of anticipates a lot of the French New Wave's forms. It draws on her interest in photography and philosophy. You can see that the way the characters are talking to one another. She's very much into documentary, and indeed the majority of her films are documentaries, not fiction films as well. But there's a kind of a documentary element to that. And the film goes kind of between this sort of documentary and fictional narrative. So you can see that kind of beautiful dolly into the log, and just looking at that shape and that abstract sort of thing of just driftwood, and sort of dwelling on the cat and the people playing in the alleyways and stuff like that. So it kind of goes between storytelling and documentary, and interestingly, she told her actors, who were very, quite well known sort of emerging actors at the time, to deliver their dialogue like they were reading it, so deliberately wouldn't, to sort of alienate the audience. So if you remember back when we were talking about, Brechtian techniques and alienating techniques that are quite often used in experimental film, Varda's definitely sort of using that here. So, as we know, a lot of people writing in Cahiers du Cinéma became sort of French New Wave filmmakers, the Nouvelle Vague, and they loved this film. They sort of adopted it, and she started making documentaries for the French Tourist Board, and she met Jacques Demy, whom she later married and worked with on sort of very many films and projects, including the beautiful Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which is this sort of musical set in Cherbourg, but she made this with Demy, and they collaborated quite a lot. Let's just have a quick look at the end of this. And then. Do you see their references to Singing in the Rain? Look at those colours. So this is a French New Wave version of documentary, of musical, sorry. This is how they sort of musical should be.
C'est terminé, oui. Le moteur qui est encore un peu à froid, mais c'est normal. Merci, merci. Touché, tu peux faire 1 heure ce soir. Ce soir ça m'est difficile, mais je pense que Pierre est libre. Pierre, est-ce que tu peux rester ce soir? Oui, tu vérifieras l'allumage de la Mercedes de monsieur. Est-ce que tu viens avec moi ce soir au volet? Non, je ne peux pas. Et toi, est-ce que tu y vas? Bien sûr. Eh ben, tout à l'heure m'a demandé de faire 1 heure de plus. Tu parles? Ce soir, c'est sacré. Je vais au théâtre. Qu'est-ce que tu vas voir? Carmen. Aurait enfant de bohème. La 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 la. J'aime pas l'opéra. Le ciné, c'est mieux. Moi, ce soir, je vais danser. La 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 la. Donne-moi une bite. Tous ces gens qui chantent, moi tu comprends, ça me fait mal. J'aime mieux le ciné, tu l'as déjà dit.
So it's a recurring thing of the French New Wave to sort of celebrate film, and they're very, very reflexive, so that all the characters will always talk about going to a film, to watching films, and you've got here like everyday life working in the mechanics becomes cinematic and a musical, the most romantic of sort of genre films there is, and it's deconstructed totally. Okay, I'm going to finish there, and then next time we'll pick that up.